Did you know that Ferrari has built a car that works better with used tires than with new? Yes, as if the logic of Formula One had been invested. But why is this happening, and what really means this discovery for Ferrari's future? This discovery is not anecdotal or circumstantial. It is not something that can be attributed to a slippery track or an atypical session. It is a trend that appeared repeatedly on 2 consecutive weekends, under completely different conditions and paths. First in Imola, a technical and narrow track, and then in Miami, a more open and hot urban circuit. Frédéric Vasseur himself, head of the Ferrari team, acknowledged it without rodeos. He said that he had never seen something similar in his life. He expressed it with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Because when your car begins to contradict the basic standards of performance, there is something deeper that is failing. And in this context, new tires are your best ally, your only real tool to get pole position. However, Ferrari has discovered that his best performance is produced with tires that have already been previously used, which have already gone through several laps of thermal and mechanical degradation. It is a technical absurd that launches an alarm signal to the entire organization. In practice, this means that Ferrari pilots have to use tire games with 1 or 2 turns on top to extract the best of the SF-25, thus sacrificing the absolute potential they could reach with new compounds. This directly affects its ability to fight for front positions on the grille. And in the modern Formula One, where the races are decided many times in the first curve, classifying is not an option, it is a necessity. The anomaly also calls into question the relationship between the car and the Pirelli tires. In particular, its ability to enter the appropriate operating window of temperature and pressure. Because if a car fails to heat fresh tires correctly, or if it does it unevenly, the performance collapses. The rubber does not grab, the car skates, and what should be a perfect lap becomes a failed attempt. This is not simply a matter of track temperature or choice of compounds. It is something that points directly to the way in which the SF-25 was designed to generate aerodynamic load, distribute its mass and absorb dynamic loads in braking and acceleration. These types of problems are not only difficult to identify, but are extremely complicated to correct in the middle of the season. Because it's not about changing a spoiler or adjusting a configuration. It is possible that it requires a complete restructuring of the aerodynamic concept of the car, something that, in full season, is virtually unfeasible. Meanwhile, each lost classification, each race conditioned by a bad exit position, is an open wound that continues to bleed vital points for the championship. What Vasseur and his team have discovered is not a simple setup error. It is the symptom of a more complex disease. And as every good doctor knows, identifying the symptom is just the first step. The really challenging will be to find the root cause before it is too late. What in principle seemed a specific rarity with the tires, ended up revealing a structural dysfunction that affects SF-25 in almost all its mechanical foundations. The anomaly of being faster with used tires than new was the entrance door to a much deeper technical crisis. Ferrari is not simply dealing with a poorly adjusted configuration. He is facing a car architecture that is showing fissures on multiple fronts. The first major problem focus lies in the rear suspension. Ferrari chose to maintain its pull rod configuration, a choice that differentiates them from many other teams that have migrated to the pushrod system looking for greater simplicity and rigidity. However, the error is not necessarily following the pull rod philosophy, but how they executed it this year. In search of greater aerodynamic efficiency, Ferrari decided to minimize the internal components of the rear suspension. That reduction sought to release space for a more aggressive diffuser and a cleaner flow towards the back of the car. The goal was ambitious, winning load without penalizing the drag. But what they won in theory lost it to practice. This simplified suspension does not have the necessary rigidity to correctly support vertical and lateral loads when the car is in real race conditions, particularly with the tank full of fuel. The result is a car that feels too much in the rear during braking and strong accelerations. This extra movement generates excessive contact of the flat background with the asphalt, especially in areas of high compression or in elevation changes. Thus, where in landslide areas becomes critical. This was, in fact, one of the factors that led to the disqualification of Lewis Hamilton in the China Grand Prix. The background sliding blocks designed to protect the integrity of the car had completely worn out. The problem goes beyond physical wear. It affects the dynamic equilibrium of the car. When the rear sinks, the car attack angle changes, affects aerodynamic stability and destabilizes the entire platform. This directly interferes with the performance in fast and medium curves, where the car should be more predictable. But it is not. In fact, one of the most recurring symptoms in the reports of the pilots is that the car becomes nervous, at the entrance of curve and extremely sensitive to small changes of direction. This mines the pilot's trust and limits its ability to squeeze the car to the fullest. In addition, the gearbox has also been repositioned slightly lower with the same aerodynamic purpose: allow a greater volume of flow to the diffuser. But in doing so, the weight distribution on the rear axle has been altered. This change has modified how the car transfers mass into acceleration, further compromising traction in slow curve outputs. The result is a car that is not only inconsistent, but also punishes the rear tires unevenly, accelerating its wear and making it difficult for the weekend. As if that were not enough, Ferrari has also seen the return of the dreaded porpoising, aerodynamic rebounds that affect the car in long lines and high-speed areas. It was thought that this phenomenon had been solved after the regulations introduced in 2023, but the SF-25 seems to be one of the few cars that has suffered again. The aerodynamic update package introduced in the first races of the year regard to improve the efficiency of the rear flow has exacerbated the problem instead of mitigating it. This porpoising not only generates discomfort for the pilot, it also interrupts aerodynamic load at critical moments, especially in braking at the end of straight or high-speed curves, where maximum stability is needed. When the car begins to bounce, it loses adherence, and the pilot must constantly correct the trajectory. It is a limit situation that physically and mentally wears the pilot and compromises the entire career strategy. In summary, Ferrari has built a car that, in its eagerness to find aerodynamic performance on the most extreme margins of the regulation, has sacrificed the mechanical basis that guarantees consistency. The SF-25 is plagued by small technical decisions that, by joining, generate a difficult monster to tame. A car that needs ideal conditions to work, and that, when these conditions do not occur, it becomes an erratic, unpredictable and frustrating machine for both its pilots and its engineers. The consequences already feel on the track. Bad classifications, committed strategies, frustrated pilots, and a team forced to improvise career solutions after career. And all part of that hidden detail that Vasseur dared to expose publicly, knowing that this truth, however uncomfortable, is the first step to try to rebuild a season that already begins to escape between the fingers. The problem of SF-25, to perform better with used tires, directly affects the classification strategy, which in turn conditions the entire race. When a car cannot maximize its most important return on Saturday, it is convicted from secondary positions. And in modern Formula One, overtaking is expensive, especially in urban or technical circuits. This makes Ferrari a team that runs all weekend uphill, forced to improvise aggressive strategies or depend on other people's mistakes. And it's not just about what happens on the track. Within Maranello, these types of problems generate internal tensions. Engineers are forced to rewrite their development plans on the march. Planned medium-term updates are advanced. Changes are introduced in key areas of the car without the complete validation they normally require. All this increases the risk of additional errors and can even cause a descending spiral where each solution attempt ends, creating new technical conflicts. In addition, there is an even greater threat in the long term: the development cycle by 2026. That year, with the introduction of the new technical regulations and the entry into force of a new hybrid architecture, the equipment must already be allocating considerable resources to their next car. If Ferrari is forced to continue investing technical and human capital in trying to save the SF-25 throughout the season, it can be left behind in the preparation for the new era. And in Formula One, losing the train can mean years of reconstruction. What Frédéric Vasseur and his team now have in their hands is not simply a difficult car. It is a crisis that threatens to compromise not only the present, but also Ferrari's immediate future as a real contender. The decisions that make in the coming weeks, from the introduction of new pieces to the management of internal expectations, will define whether this will be a survival season or the prelude to a new success chapter. In Formula One, the margins of error are minimal, but the consequences of a conceptual failure can be immense. What began as a simple observation about the performance with used tires has ended up revealing a chain of technical decisions that have put Ferrari in a delicate situation. The hidden detail that Frédéric Vasseur dared to recognize publicly is not just an isolated problem. It is the most visible symptom of a systemic failure in the design, conception, and operational approach of the SF-25. A failure that has left the team exposed in its most crucial season since its internal restructuring. These types of anomalies are not common in the elite of motoring. Most teams work to minimize uncertainties, optimize each component, and ensure that your car behaves as expected in each circumstance. Instead, Ferrari has created a car that not only does not respond to what was planned, but also acts against the most basic principles of modern competition dynamics. A car that rewards the use of degraded tires and penalizes the freshness of new compounds represents a contradiction that puts the entire team strategy in check during a Grand Prize weekend. And this is where I want to leave you an open reflection. Are you seeing the beginning of a new Ferrari crisis or the exact point where its resurgence begins? Will this technical failure be a necessary condemnation or lesson? What happens in the next races will answer that question. And if you are interested that we explore how other teams have transformed similar crises into large returns as McLaren did in 2024, tell me. There is much more than analyzing, and history, as always in Formula One, is never completely written.